Paramahansa Yogananda, he often spoke about the necessity for people to get serious about the inner spiritual life because the world was not going to stay the same. And he didn't just speak of, we'd have a year or two of drought or a COVID epidemic. He talked about a total transformation of globally of the way we operate, because we are moving into a higher age. And as we move into a higher age, it's already happening technologically and scientifically. Physics and metaphysics are beginning to look like the same thing. The Vedas had all these stories about the illusion of this world and the unity of all forces and the nature of energy and all these things. And now the physicists are saying exactly the same thing. It's really beginning to look like one story. Einstein just turned everything upside down, more than 100 years ago now, or whenever it was, but it was not very long ago, but longer ago than we have adjusted to. One of my favorite cartoons from the New Yorker magazine is a scene in New York, just a New York street scene, and you have all the different characters. You have the man who sells the hot dogs, you have the street cleaner, you have the merchant standing in the front of his place, you have the mother pushing her baby down and then it's a quote from Albert Einstein. And each of them, in the midst of whatever they're doing, is stopping and just sort of contemplating the nature of reality. And then Einstein's quote is, mankind will have to gradually accustom himself to an energy concept of the universe. And you see everybody gradually accompany like this. And we're just absorbing it without really necessarily stopping and thinking about the implications. The mere fact that I'm sure every one of you has a cell phone in your hands somewhere, and you could contact anybody in the world. Last night I was on the phone for a long time to my friend in Italy. She just called, and there we have it. Complete dissolution of space, just gone. And time. You can travel now in such a quick period of time. Time isn't gone, but space is really beginning to shrink quite a lot in terms of communication. That's just one tiny example. And all the implications of this, both in terms of the meaning of our lives and how we conduct our lives and how we get along with each other, what's happening is this tremendous polarization. Yogananda spoke of the fact that there would be international conflict. He actually spoke in 1950 of 2 more world wars. And he talked about serious economic difficulties. He talked about earth changes of a cataclysmic nature. He talked about this in 1950. Kriyananda was present. He said when Master talked about it, I tend to call Yogananda Master. Kriyananda I call Swami. He said it felt like it was just going to happen tomorrow, that we'd be lucky to get to the following Sunday before all these events started taking place. So I meet Swami in 1969, and by 1971, I'm living where he lives. In fact, I became his secretary, and I worked very closely with him on and off for the next 45 years. And every year, Swami would say, well, I think this is going to be the year. 1971, which was before many of you were born, there it is. But it never came about. But Swami continually talked about it. We often, in fact, wish that he would stop talking about it, because we were fine. But he felt a profound obligation because he'd heard the Master declare it with so much fierceness. Now, Yogananda is not the only one. Padre Pio in Italy, Mother Mary in Medjugorje, and now you can just get politicians and economists, and everybody talks about it. However you think about it, times are different. This is really different. And even now, in the last few years, certainly in the country that I live in, and I know, as far as I know, every country, it's just things are polarizing, and there's an intensity to the energy and an increasing divide between 2 kinds of points of view. And one point of view is that, well, of course, we're all in this together. This is a new age of enlightenment, and energy means that all these differences are just superficial, and we can welcome a whole new reality. And, we can internalize religion and we don't have to feel so separate from one another, and who cares what color your skin is, and on and on and on. And then there is a whole group of people who feel really quite different than that, who have really liked that things are separate and they stay separate. My country is separate from yours. My race is different from yours. My religion is different from yours. And they are committed to the form of things. And the form of things is separate. This is a table, this is a chair, I am a female, you are a male. It's just, the forms are fixed. But the energy, this is what Einstein tells us. All this that looks like matter to us, it's all just energy, just assuming different forms. And those forms are extremely mutable. You just apply a certain amount of energy and then it shifts into something else, which allows us this incredible freedom that you don't have if you're born into it and you die into it, and that's what it is. My father was a carpenter, I'm a carpenter. My grandfather was a carpenter, I'm a carpenter. I've lived on this land, this is where I always live. All these different things. But there's a force which is not just human created. And this is something also that Yogananda talks about. There are every ancient traditional society, not every, but many, have this understanding that there are different yugas is the Sanskrit word, but there are different ages the civilizations go through. Bronze, iron, bronze, silver, gold, the world of men, the world of heroes, the world of demigods, the world of gods. There's always 4. And the ancient Indian teaching speaks of the age of matter, the age of energy, the age of thought, and the age of spirit. And it's an ancient tradition in which this marvelous 24,000-year cycle where we ascend and then we descend, and then we ascend and then we descend on planet Earth. This is not humanity. This is just planet Earth, which moves closer and farther away to the center of the galaxy. These are very interesting. Those of you who want to discuss it more, if you come tomorrow, we'll talk about it more. But however you slice it, however you want to call it, look at 1900, look at 2025. In 1900, it was all physical. When they started making automobiles, to try to tell you how powerful this automobile was, they would say it was a 4-horsepower engine, right? I mean, can any of you calculate? Well, 4 horsepower, 4 horses can pull this much, 4 horses are that strong. It means nothing to us anymore. But at that point, they couldn't even comprehend energy that was in a little iron box. And so they had to try to describe what this was. And so they described it according to what people knew, which was a physical form that they could actually see. Do you know how many horsepower your cell phone has? Does anybody know? I mean, we're completely different. And many of you were just born into this reality without even knowing that it's odd. And that's where we're moving. We're moving what we've seen in this last century or so of the transformation of our whole society. And we also now, because of all the social and political unrest, we have this huge migration of people. I mean, I'm speaking from the American point of view, and let's just say it's a big issue. I know it's a big issue here, of course. I was in the temple that we have in California. There were 2 girls from Finland, and they were, archetypal Finnish girls, lovely girls, light-skinned, blonde hair, blue eyes. And I would even get them confused and they were both standing in front of me. And I said, does everyone in your country look like you? And they sort of looked at each other and said, yes. Because it had been this uninterrupted little story up in that freezing cold place where I was recently, right? Like that. And then I read in the paper about the mass migration of all the Syrians into Finland. Yeah, they'll start going to school together. They'll start falling in love with each other. There'll be terrible upset in the families. Then they'll start producing darling little babies that don't look like my 2 friends anymore. It's like we can't stop it. But a lot of people want to. That's what we're caught. A lot of people prefer the past to the present, and they certainly want the past to look like the future to look like the past. And it's getting harder and harder to reconcile those. You know, it's just like there's this big divide. Most of the time on the planet, Swami Kriyananda put it, the population is shaped like a big fat cigar. And most people just kind of hang out in the middle. And they're not really particularly good, and they're not particularly bad either. They just go along like that. And then there's a few good people over here and a few bad people over here. Times like this, the middle disappears. And you have a great weight on one side and a great weight on the other, and that's what I want to talk about. But there's not much middle ground. And the reason that Yogananda was talking about all these difficult times coming was because he wanted us to do the appropriate thing. And the appropriate thing is not, well, I really need more money. I really need, just like I'm going to, it's a shifting world, so I'm going to nail down my little piece of it. Just try to make it work for me. But, these days, I don't know how insecure, you must be much more insecure than we are because you're here. You've been through a lot more than we've been through on our side. But, we count on money in America is what we count on. We'll see. But what he really wanted to say was really, really simple. He said, the power, what this is for, this is how he put it. He said, what this is for, what's going to happen, it's not a punishment, it's a necessary change because we have become so materialistic and so infatuated with our own selves in so many ways and very greedy as a civilization, so to speak, levels of luxury and, distribution of wealth, that we've just forgotten our connection. We've forgotten our divinity and we've forgotten our shared humanity. And so he said, God will perform a little operation. And we will have to look more upward into the spirit, inward into our own power, and less sort of trying to make it work by making this world work. And he said, at the end of this rather chaotic period, he said there will be hundreds of years of peace and prosperity because we will realize that this is what we need. He put it also very simply, it's those who love God will not have to be forced to expand their awareness because they will already be thinking about this. And we're not talking about God the way this church says it or that church says it or this dogma in the English language, which is our shared language, sort of. Okay? The word God, if you think about it, has actually no meaning. That the only meaning that word actually has is if you look to a church. Because inherently there's no concept associated with it. In the Sanskrit language, there are hundreds of words that can all be translated into the word God. And some of them are about deities and so on. I'm not going there. But many of them are experiences that we have. If you say Shanti, you're talking about peace. If you say Prem, you're talking about love. And Prana, you're talking about life force. And all of these words actually are words for the divine. But when we say love, we have some idea of what we're talking about. And then you just take that word love from the experience you have and you ask yourself, how expansive can it become? Because what we're also talking about, when we really talk about God, which is a word I use very easily, I didn't when I started 50 years ago, but now I do, we're really talking about what we long for. That's what we're really talking about. And what is it that everybody longs for? They long for happiness. Isn't that so? And we know that we were born to be happy. Because when we're not happy, we feel very mistreated and rebel. We rebel against it. Isn't it so? And if we were just born to be miserable, we would just be miserable. But every time it devolves down into misery, which periodically it does for all of us, our first thought is, what can I do about this? Or if not, we just weep and pray for someone to rescue us. But nonetheless, the point is we know it's not our natural state. Because our natural state is bliss, which is what the word Ananda means. But it's not bliss like, oh, well, I got a new job and aren't these darling new shoes that I just got. That's not the sort of happiness we're talking about. We're talking about something that can't be disturbed by anything that happens in this world. Okay? And so as long as the world is comfortable, our incentive is a little bit less. But every time, if you think about it in your own life, if you think honestly about it, you'll realize that the things that just were awful when they happened and forced us to get bigger and to get stronger and to think more expansively and to have more imagination, at the end of it, well, I really didn't like it, but I have to say it was the making of me. I was saying to a group the other night, my mother, God bless her, she died 20 years ago. She was a very sweet mother. I asked her once, what was the happiest time of your life? She said, when you 3 children were small and you belonged to me. It was very dear. I was very touched by it. She was a very sweet mama. When she was 65, she got Parkinson's. She had it for 15 years, so she was a little older than that before it took her out. But my mother was very dear, but she didn't have a lot of willpower. She just kind of folded up. She didn't know how to try that hard. But when that disease got a hold of her, she really, she became mother warrior. She just fought for every inch of continuing life until it took her out. But after about 10 or 11 years, I was sitting with her and she said it like this. I hate to admit it, she said, but this disease has been the making of me. And my mother, I believe in, the word is not I believe. I understand that reincarnation is an essential part of making sense out of life. My mother, not so much. So I don't know what the making of she was thinking of, but I know what it was. Because the willpower she gained from those last 15 years of her life is going to allow her to use a lot of the talents that she had that she couldn't quite organize herself to use. It has been the making of her in a continuous way. And I was very respectful of her for beginning to see that. So we have this prejudice in our minds that hard challenges are bad. And that when life is easy and pleasurable, that's good. In my world, when we talk about karma, good karma means it all went my way. Bad karma means it didn't go my way. But if we're thinking from the point of view that what is the purpose of life? The expansion of consciousness, the awakening to our own potential. Because what we're not really trying to acquire anything. That's the materialistic point of view that I gather. What did they used to say? He who dies with the most toys wins. Was that a phrase ever here? That was sort of like one of those incredibly egoic, misguided phrases that people used to repeat right after looking out for number 1. But if we have any understanding, we actually begin to realize that what really increases our happiness and decreases our suffering is as we wake up and realize things that were always there. We didn't acquire it. We just came to know it. All of growth, even from babyhood, is an ever-increasing awareness. That's what little babies do. They begin to become aware of things, and they get so excited. A friend of mine, her little boy, he was so adorable anyway. He was walking and just beginning to talk. I've never raised children, so I can't say exactly, maybe 3. His mother kept a very orderly house, and he was beginning to get, the way the world worked. And he was very excited about understanding how the world worked. I went over to dinner at their house once. He took my hand and took me upstairs, took me to his room, and he put his hands on his little dresser drawer that was down at the bottom. He looked at me like, you are not going to believe this. And he opened his drawer and then with just the full toddler enthusiasm screamed out the word, socks! And there were socks in his drawer, right? Then he pushed it, closed it. Then he, just looked at me like, you are not going to believe this. He pulls the drawer out again. Socks! It's like suddenly he was aware of something in the world that he could rely on, which is every time he opened the drawer, there would be socks in it. Yeah, I mean, we think it's hysterically funny. You think that the masters aren't laughing at us? I've had this strange idea lately, and I'm sure this isn't really valid, but I have this strange idea that Jesus and Krishna and Yogananda and Lord Rama and the Buddha, every so often they get together for coffee. And they sit around and they compare notes about the preposterous things that their disciples are doing. And they tell stories like, socks, except on our level. Yeah, but it's like that because compared to our own potential, which is what the masters represent. They don't represent, look at me. They represent, look at you. Look at yourself. Seek ye first the kingdom of God. Well, where is the kingdom of God? Kingdom of God is within. Wow, what do you know? It's inside. Socks. Every time. Every single time it's still there. And that's what we're here to do. But we get distracted. And we get super confused. Just super confused. Every single thing that we do it because we think it's going to increase our happiness and decrease our suffering. I mean, really just look at it. Every single thing that you do, down to the pair of socks that you bought yesterday or whatever it is you do, we always think it's going to make us happy. That when we have a huge argument with someone and really tell them what we really think and lose a lifelong friendship, or when we have the opportunity to be expansive and risk and open our hearts and we don't do it. We think if I protect myself, I'll be happier than if I risk. I mean, all of these things, every single thing that we do, and much of what we do is entirely misguided, but we didn't know it at the time. I have this wonderful mantra that has really helped me a lot. It seemed like a good idea at the time. And I just, I look back and I see things that I did and I just can't believe it. But it did seem like a good idea at the time because at the level of awareness I had, I believed that that action would bring me happiness. And when it turned out not to, well, I just didn't know. Just as simple as that. If I had known better, I would have done better. If I could have done better, I would have done better. But I didn't have the awareness. Oh, how did I get the awareness? Let me think. Oh, by doing it wrong. That's how it happens. So when our mistakes are manifested as difficult times, is that a bad thing or a good thing? Have we reached the apex of our potential that we just want to sit here and never grow? Now multiply that out to a cosmic level. Now, there's another piece of this that is absolutely vitally important, which is reincarnation and the continuation of our consciousness, both, that life that we're living is just one chapter of a very long book. And you don't have to have that to have this make sense, but it makes a lot more sense if you can do that. Yeah. Because otherwise, life itself does not come out right. Bad people never get punished and good people never win too often. But if we think of it instead, just over the course of your life, we have ups and downs. But if we keep learning, if we keep growing in our awareness, we hope to die wiser than we were born. One of my friends, her mother, she said just before her mother passed away, she said, I always thought when I got older I would get wiser, but I didn't. but the daughter said to me, in fact, she really did. And the fact that she was so humble about it was actually one of the things that she learned. But we just, one of the incredible motivators for me personally on the spiritual path, and this was around my 18th, 19th year, right at that period of time, I was not connected to my extended family, so I didn't have many people that were close to me. I never knew anybody who died. The issue, I never had a pet that died, but nonetheless, I was very conscious about the fact that we would all die. Didn't traumatize me. It was just a fact that we would die. And at one point, and this is, when I look back over a whole life, it's really interesting where just the things that stand out. I can still remember my pink teddy bear with the plastic nose, and it was about as big as I was. And I remember the teddy bear was about that big, and I remember it being the same size as me, and I remember chewing on it in my little crib. I could just, that vivid like that. We all just have, I remember my kindergarten teacher favored me over the other children when I was wrong, and I allowed her to do it. She blamed them for something that I had done, and I allowed her to do it and didn't tell her that she was wrong. I still remember that moral crisis for a 5-year-old. I'm going to have to reincarnate so I can go back and say, no, I was wrong. But it's funny how what sticks with you, isn't it? But this is one of those moments. Something happened, and I don't know what it was. But somehow, as I say it, I felt like I stayed awake all night, whether I did or not. That's what it feels like in memory. I was thinking about dying. And I'd never been with anyone who died. I didn't know anybody who had died. Subsequently, because I'm part of a large community, I've been called multiple times, not hundreds of times, but a dozen or more times, to just sit with someone when they breathe their last, or be there toward the end of people's lives. And it's very interesting to me that the picture I had in my mind was exactly what I've seen since then. Maybe I've died before. What do you think? But in any case, the character of that, I've always been optimistic, and I've been relatively nice, not always, but relatively nice. So I was dreaming my own death. I was imagining my own death. And my life had come out well in this imaginary thing. There were lots of people who loved me, and they were all crowded around me. And, it was very positive. But the fact that it was so positive is part of what made it so poignant. Because this is what I say about the reality of this. I've been at the vigils like this that sometimes go on for days or even for weeks. And I know that the quality of the conversation around the deathbed varies widely, because sometimes you're very concerned about the person in front of you who's dying, and sometimes you're just talking about whether a sports team won or not, and where you're going to go for lunch, and then you remember that somebody's dying, and then you relate to them again, because you just can't hold it for a long period of time. So it was very realistic. All these people were just being themselves, and sometimes they were paying attention to me, and sometimes they weren't. But what was happening to me was exactly what does happen, where the energy was coming in from the edges, coming up from the legs and in from the arms and centering actually literally in the chakras, although I wouldn't have known that then, just more and more like this. And there was this extraordinary sense of solitude, meaning it didn't really matter how many people loved me or how much they loved me, that this was just going to be me, because that's what happens. And for some people that's terrifying, and for some people it's wonderful, because we begin to experience the divine, which is ourselves. We begin to realize that and now you just go through NDE, near-death experience, and you can spend the next 6 weeks just having people tell you about this over and over. None of that existed then. But that was also, it said to me, why am I thinking about anything else? Because every single thing that I do, and I've participated in this world. I had no inclination to be a cloistered nun. I was from a Jewish family that was a little hard to put together, I mean, becoming a yogi self-realizationist was hard enough. Imagine if I tried to become a Catholic nun, that would have really done them in. But in any case, it's not that you don't participate in life, because even in my imagination, it had been a good life. It was a happy life. But in the end, all that I would have was my own consciousness. And when here's the part of it that really matters. Think about this. Everything that you experience is always your own consciousness. I mean, every one of us, we're in the same room, and because we're all in the conscious mind, not the subconscious mind. If you're totally in the subconscious mind, your reality is entirely self-defined. This is what real mental illness is. person just drops out of the objective world and just makes their own world, and it doesn't match anymore. But here, if we all met, tomorrow and talked, if some of us are going to meet tomorrow, so we would talk about this and we would all recognize the big picture of Yogananda and Kriyananda. We would all see slightly different things. Some of the women might know what shoes I'm wearing, but not all the men necessarily. This sort of thing. But we would still know we were all together because it's fundamentally a shared reality that we're working with. But still, every one of you will go home with a different impression. And whatever impression you have will be entirely within you. And have you ever been with someone who is really depressed? No matter where you take them, it's always ugly and awful. No matter what people say, it's always sad and discouraging, and you're just cheerful as can be. Same, because all we ever experience is within us. And one of the reasons that we get so confused is because our senses point outward. And everything feeds this idea, and because we are slowly accustoming ourselves to an energy concept of the universe. And we think that it all comes from outside of us. Because we do have experiences that are catalyzed by external events, but we experience them inside ourselves. So what Yogananda says is going to happen, coming soon, is that the outside world is going to become more and more unreliable, which is already happening. The country that I live in, it's the present government is dismantling all the traditions that I realize now we Americans have been really proud of. There's a lot of pride, and it hasn't been in office. I mean, he's deliberately doing it, and there are many people in our country, less than half, but still half, who are all in favor of it. It's just many things that we've just relied on for centuries, the way the courts work, the way the government works, just everything. It's just very magnificently, brilliantly, honestly, just dismantling it. Very effectively dismantling it. And we just don't know where that's going. I know the politics and the nature of my country more than any other, but I get the picture that it's happening in lots of countries. And so many things that we've been able to depend on, we're just not going to be able to. And that isn't, we know countries and we all have friends who are in war zones right now. Just all of a sudden, they're just in war zones. So are we just going to wait? Are we going to wait to wake up until we find ourselves as refugees with half our families killed? Or are we just going to start now? Are we going to start now and really start thinking about what brings happiness and what brings suffering? Because the more we depend on a world that is undependable, the more frightened and vulnerable we're going to be. Now, there's other bigger pieces to this which are vitally important. It isn't just centering in yourself. There really is a transition happening, and there's a war of values happening. And I don't mean political right, left, or whatever any of that stuff is. I don't pay attention to that, because that's not the issue. It's the issue of materialism versus divinity, of inward awareness versus thinking that the world is only existing outside of us. It's a metaphysical question about, what is the purpose of our lives, all of this. And I'm going to come back to why I told you at the beginning that we've traveled so much. I've been listening to all of this for a long, long time because of Swami Kriyananda's relationship to Yogananda. And I was a little pessimistic. If you read the paper, you can be really pessimistic. Well, there aren't no such thing as papers anymore. You know what I mean. The news, however you receive it. But I was pessimistic, and then I started traveling. And there's a whole other civilization happening now. And it's not the one that's in the news. And it's not the governments. The material power is a certain reality. But every change begins with ideas, doesn't it? With that we're getting used to an energy concept of the universe. We're breaking down the barriers of cultures and religions and countries. We all know people from all different places who look very different from us and have always lived very different. And we're all discovering that we're all kind of the same, aren't we? We put the children together and the children can't tell the difference. One of my friends, this was actually Arivan, he in his high school, most of the children had light skin, but one particular boy was a very dark, I think he was an American, but he had very dark skin, African American. And he was he was talking to his dad about something that he'd done with this boy, and he said his name, and his father said, which child is that? Which one of your friends is that? So he talked about his interests in school, his talent with sports, some jokes he's told. He said everything except that he was the only child in his friend group who had such dark skin. And finally the father said, "Oh, you mean the African American?" And then the boy said, "Yeah." And it was like, when I heard that, I thought, isn't that marvelous? Like, my group doesn't care. His group doesn't notice. He's just taken that extra step that the form, it doesn't register. All that registers is the energy that he's working with. And that's where we're going. That's the new civilization that understands that we're all children of the same God, and that is a loving God, and that God doesn't really care what we look like or what we say. They care what kind of a heart we have. And I've been to a lot of places like, South Africa and Japan and, not just the obvious big European countries, and Latvia and Estonia, Lithuania, Finland also. And there are a lot of people who are making the future. And there is a tremendous amount of strength in it. Everything begins with ideas. And we're all getting very new ideas now, thinking in a very different way. Everything that manifests first as an idea. Somebody has to have the idea. And then you begin to put energy into it. And if you put enough energy into it, then it manifests. And a lot of us, me included, I'm very creative. I have a lot of ideas, some really good ideas, but I don't put energy into them, so they don't manifest. But the ones that we do put energy into begin to manifest. And so now being vegan is really, really common. I was somewhere a day or two ago, I don't remember, and it was so like, who's allergic to peanuts? Who wants plant milk? Who doesn't want oat milk but wants almond milk? Who doesn't want almond milk? Who's gluten-free? Who will eat the eggs? This one has a little dairy in it. It was comical, but it was just the way things are. Now, that's not in itself going to shift the planet, but what that represents, which is just even the whole idea now. Like, I know here, veganism is so strong here. Everywhere in the world, veganism is strong. In Lithuania, very, very popular vegan restaurant. But think of all the steps that get you to vegan. First, you have an affinity. First, you have an affinity with health, well-being, natural living, sentient creatures that need to be respected. Then you have to put energy behind it. And it's not the end of everything, but it's the tip of the iceberg. So we are here for a reason, and we chose to incarnate. This is what all the near-death people tell us. There's this very, very conscious dimension, which is the pre and post life dimension. And we have this response. We have chosen this. And that's kind of annoying, but it is, But it is true. We chose it because we have, from that other dimension, the words good and bad mean different things. From that other dimension, all we want to do is become more aware, to become more enlightened. Because the real drama, and this is part of the Indian explanation of the yugas, of these 24,000 years up and 12,000 years up and 12,000 years gone, down again in these different ages that get more and more refined. Planet just keeps going in circles. Planet is moving closer to the galaxy and then farther away and then closer and farther away. That's what the pyramids are. Nobody can understand the pyramids because it was descending from the apex like this. And the stories about Atlantis were the apex like that. And so they knew how to build those pyramids, but then the age began to fall and they couldn't remember, nobody could remember how to do it. And we're coming up the other side. That's the good news. We haven't quite gotten to the level of the pyramids yet, but as soon as we do, we'll know how they did it. I mean, you can go now and get your kidney stone dissolved by sound waves. And every pregnant mother waits for the first ultrasound. We don't even know what we're talking about. What is ultrasound? We somehow use sound waves to see inside the womb. And we just think that's perfectly normal. Tell somebody from 200 years ago that you could, here's a picture of my unborn baby. It was just craziness, but we just live with this. We just think it's perfectly reasonable now. So but the drama is not the planet is going to evolve or that humanity is going to evolve. It's like if humanity is going to evolve, we don't have to put any energy out. We just sit here, wait for humanity to evolve. You know, free lunch, perfect. Humanity's evolving. I'm one of humanity. That's not how it works. The drama is 100% entirely individual. It's our individual consciousness. And when Kriyananda asked Yogananda, do we always reincarnate on earth? You know, is there such a thing as an earthling? He laughed. He didn't just say no, he laughed at the very idea that this is the only possible planet. Because all the planets are in higher and lower vibrations and are based on different realities. This was pretty much the end of my interest in formal education. I was 10. And my teacher's name was Mrs. Pugh. Can you imagine anybody having the nerve to be a fourth grade teacher whose name was Pugh? I always admired her for that, but for nothing else. But she was giving us a science lesson. Science is not my best subject, probably because of Mrs. Pugh. She said, she listed out what was required to support life as we know it, required, I can't even tell you, but things like air and water and stuff like that. So she lists out 4 or 5 things. I was a smart aleck kid, so I raised my hand. I said, couldn't there be a form of life that was adapted to other conditions? Oh, no, because then she said, and because Earth is the only planet that has these conditions, that means there's only life on Earth. I said, couldn't there be a form of life that's adapted to other conditions? I mean, that is a no-brainer, don't you think so? And she said, no. And I inwardly thought, you are an idiot and you are my teacher. How did she know? Of course she didn't know. Anyway, Yogananda supported me. He said there are countless material planes. There's countless material planets. You have countless choices. So what we're doing when we choose to incarnate is we have certain karma. We have certain lessons that we need to learn. Things that we don't know about the fundamentals of what brings happiness and what makes suffering. And the reason we're all so different is not because we're fundamentally different inside, but because we're at different vibrations of understanding. And we can still express that vibration differently. You know, some people like to sing, some like to paint, some like to be quiet at home, some like to be in nature, but we're all thinking about self-expansion, about self-expression, about attuning to a greater reality. So that's what we're all working with, and there are realities. We already know that there are certain conditions that we can't make up. You know, we can't say, I'm not going to eat anything anymore. I often use the example, a little child will say, chocolate cake is my favorite food, Mommy. From now on, I just want chocolate cake. I want chocolate cake for breakfast. I want chocolate cake for lunch. I want it for dinner, okay? And Mommy says, you won't grow up big and strong if you eat nothing but chocolate cake. And then the child with absolutely irrefutable logic says, yes, I will. Child knows nothing about nutrition or what it needs to grow, but it simply declares. This is when Buddha and Krishna and Yogananda and Christ are all having coffee together, and they see us say, yes, I will. I'll break every law of human nature and divine reality, and I'll still be perfectly happy. Yes, I will. No, you won't. And that's what karma is. Karma is something we don't know. And tomorrow we can talk a little more. It's stored in the chakras, which is the energy system of the body. When we step out of our physical bodies, as all the near-death people tell us, we're still ourselves. Because we are an energy pattern, guys. This is an energy universe. And the chakras are the storehouse. And so in our energy bodies, with all of our unlearned and learned lessons with us, in some way that I don't quite understand, I don't think it's quite as like this, like choosing a college, but we sort of look out and we think, what planet would be the right planet for me? What family, what culture, what country, all those things. And we just find the one that matches. I need a lot of willpower. I think I'll be German. I love nature. I think I'll be British. I'd like to play with the fairies. I think I'll come out into the forest here. I mean, just think about it. I'm an American. I really didn't, when I left everything behind at 22, met Swami and I moved to the community. I was telling this story in Bangalore to a group of Ananda devotees. And I said, so I met Swami and I just left everything behind. I went and lived in the community. I never looked back. And they said to me, and what did your parents say? And I said, I never thought to ask them. And, I mean, I'm here in front of all these Indian parents. I said, I'm an American. I did it on purpose. I wanted that freedom because that was, why was I born there? We look, I wanted a very independent life, so that was the right country for that. All of those things. And, you see, we said, oh, wow, it's going to be really exciting on planet Earth. There's going to be some really turbulent times. It's not going to be business as usual. I won't be bored. It's going to happen. And then we also said, and I'm the future, so I think I'll come. I know what the answer is here. I know where this planet's trying to go. I've been on other planets at high ages. I know what it looks like. And so we came for that reason. I mean, that's why you're in this room, because something in you says there has to be another answer. It's not what everyone else is seeing. And this is the fun of it, and it's scary. The other reason we came here is because there's a lot of really naughty children. Divine Mother's really naughty children, because everybody gets a chance to find out what makes them happy and what doesn't. This is a great time for people who like to destroy things to be born, because it's so turbulent. There's a lot of people who like violence, and a lot of people who want really big toys like armies and tanks and bombs and things like that. And they're very busy doing that and want to have power and take more land and be, all these sorts of things, which are all misunderstandings that we've all been through too. It's just, and it's their turn. This is a really good time for them to be born. Divine Mother loves all her children just the same. It's really annoying sometimes, but it's true. So they're getting to find out just like we get to find out. So I know that I came here because it scares me. So how much faith do I really have in God? How much can I really live by the things I'm trying to tell you? I'm a student too. I'm pretty clever with my words, but I'm also, it scares me. It doesn't scare me as much as it used to, but it also scares me. I'm not scared for myself, but gosh, already a lot of people are suffering. And it's really, really hard. So, do I believe that do I believe in God? Do I believe that there's a divine purpose? Do I believe that everybody is here having the experiences they need in order to grow? Or do I need to make it different than it is? And how's that working out for you? Are we going to really just have to feel and find and understand that we're part of a divine reality that is acting itself out? I don't see any other choice. We can't control it. This is what drives people to God. Because you start asking questions more deeply. What is really going on here? And then you start doing the practices that put you in touch on a deeper level. And I was an early adopter, but I was just born with that. There has to be another story here. When I said to Swami Kriyananda, I said early on, I said, I've had a very fortunate life. I no traumas, no, just nothing that really makes people intense. I've had a wonderful life. And even when in my early 20s, I said to Swami, I have always had this intense need to understand how to be happy, and I've never been unhappy. It was just so strange. And he just said, well, past lives. And that's what I've come to understand. Think how many incarnations end without resolution. Where do you think that energy goes? It's just an impression in your chakras, and you take it to the next level. So I recognize now, after all these years, I've come to know, the karmic patterns that were driving me. It was like I've had enough of that. I need to find another way. It did not work out well for me. So, but every time you learn something you didn't know, it opens a dimension above your present level of consciousness. And so then you go to there. And then how far does it go beyond? Isn't that an interesting question? So I've gained this much. How much more is there to gain? Well, the masters tell us, be ye therefore perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. And that it wasn't a, what do I say? It was a commandment. And it was a declaration of that which is. It wasn't even an affirmation, it was a declaration. And what would drive us to that? Well, not being able to rely on anything else. We would either fall into despair or rise into glory. So that's why we're here. And, how to be, whatever we called this, shifting times, how to be strong, or whatever it was, how to negotiate shifting times. This is the only answer. But hallelujah, there's an answer. And the answer is within you. Seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all these things will be added unto you, he said. Yogananda called it a portable paradise. He was very colorful. Wouldn't that be helpful? And wouldn't that be something great to be able to give to those you love? Or at least stand there with those you love? From my experiences of being with people who are dying, sometimes I was with people I could talk to, but not always. Sometimes only the person who was dying was connected, or maybe somebody in the family calls me in. But I realized if there's one person in the room who's not afraid, the whole room changes. I was invited in to be there at 3 p.m. on Tuesday afternoon when they disconnected the life support machine for this man who himself had no interest. He found out there was no sex in heaven, and he wasn't interested in heaven after that. It was one of my favorite. But he was actually a great soul. He just had a different way of expressing it. But his wife wanted me to be there. And he had sudden cancer, and he was still a vital man. He wasn't elderly. He'd been unconscious. But when I arrived at 2:30, he was fully awake. And he knew at 3 o'clock he was going to die. And he was not at all, he was absolutely courageous in the face of it. The doctors and the nurses, however, were different. I mean, he couldn't talk, and I really wanted to be able to converse with him. But they absolutely insisted on sedating him. And I tried to explain to them that he didn't need to be sedated. He could die consciously. But they just couldn't do it. I added a little bit, the man who was dying and his wife, we were strong together. And that was when I realized, you don't have to say anything. Just be there and be strong. Changes everything. The question is, I'm repeating it for the sake of the recording. If you're in a position where you have conflict with someone, did you mean external conflict or personal conflict?
I'm thinking like civil war.
You're in a war zone. So that you're in a place where there's real conflict. Would you try to be peaceful? How do you respond? Okay, let me say, Enlightenment is not linear. It's not like everybody lines up like the beginning of a marathon, and here we are in delusion, and we move as a group, and some are behind and some are ahead, and it's really simple to tell. He's advanced, she isn't. It's not at all like that. If you think of a wheel, a spin, like a round wheel, we're all trying to get to our own center. We're trying to get to the center point of divinity, which is within us, which unites us with the entire creation. Another way of thinking of it is, let me finish this image first. It's at the center, and so we're all trying to move from the edge of our own consciousness to the origin point within our own consciousness, within us. This is where the chakra system and everything, the kingdom of God, is within us. It's the energy self within the physical self that we're reaching for. So if we're all arrayed on this wheel, if you're way to the east and you want to get to the center, you go west. If you're way to the west and you want to go to the center, you have to go east. So it's the opposite direction to balance and learn what you have to learn. Some people who are soldiers, even if they might be serving a cause that's not terrific, perhaps being a soldier is a good thing for them because they might be cowardly. They might have no discipline. They might never have lived for any ideal other than self-interest. And so they might come into a place where they can be soldiers and they can discipline themselves. They can even die for a cause. Of course, it's better to die for a noble cause, but if you have no cause at all and you get caught up and it inspires in you discipline and self-sacrifice, you could be advancing. So and I know we're in a Quaker place, which is against all war, but there are times when to have the courage to face into something is better than being too lazy or too afraid or too selfish to sacrifice yourself. There are also times when, in conflict, you have to just stand up and sacrifice yourself. I mean, maybe not with a gun in your hand, but you simply have to, because you have to, because without principles, you're not worth anything. But here's a very interesting, because I was raised in a Jewish family. I was born in 1947. My family all came out of Eastern Europe quite some time ago. So there was nothing personal about the Second World War to me, except if you're a Jewish person, you think about it. And I had this, I don't know whether I died in a concentration camp or not, but I had this long time concern of finding myself in the concentration camp presented at a prison, something where I was powerless and evil people were hurting people around me. If I was in such a situation and somebody was being hurt, but it was entirely futile, this was my dilemma, entirely futile to try to intervene, should I intervene anyway? Just because rather than stand and let it happen. And I lived with this for years, and finally I realized I could ask Swami Kriyananda. He had a perspective that would give me an answer. So I explained this whole dilemma. He was used to me by now. I explained this whole dilemma. And he said, and this was his answer, he said, what you're actually asking, then he went on to say what I knew. Maybe I could save someone. Maybe I would make it worse for everyone. We have all seen the movies and read the books. We know what this story is. He said, so what you're actually asking is, what would God want you to do in a moment of crisis? You're in a moment of crisis and you need to know right then, what is the upward path here? He said, the only way you can know that is he said, because in a moment of crisis, you will go true to form. So he said, you have to practice when it's easier. In other words, we have to just start asking all the time, on what basis am I making decisions? Am I just going with subconscious habit? Am I just following people around me? Am I scared? Am I being loyal to my own ideals? In which way is forward? Because spirituality is not always just to be nice. I mean, we have words for that. It's called enabling, or all the different things that you can say now because our psychology is catching up. So you don't necessarily serve someone's best interest by allowing them to take advantage of you. And you're not more important than other people, but you're not less important either. It's here's the whole story, and where is righteousness? And if righteousness, means putting somebody's belongings into a black trash bag and throwing them out the front door, that could be the righteous action at that point. But the only way you'll know is if you have practiced when it was easier. Every time you have a decision to make, am I trying to be more, no, what you're trying to be loyal to is you're trying to be loyal to truth. And truth is what everyone needs in order to grow. And to have the courage to live by that is a big practice. So you can project it like I did into the concentration camp. You're projecting it into the war zone. I mean, maybe you are already in one. I mean, there's a lot of people all over the world who are fleeing from those things. But you have to practice. And that's why I'm talking to you now. Because if things get much worse on this planet, if the violence spreads, if everything starts spreading, we need to be strong. And if we just wait until we're on fire before it occurs to us to try to ask ourselves, what is the through line? What is the light here? What is the pole star? We need to start now. So that is the answer. And you might be born just to die in some heroic, futile action. And there's a story that Swami Kriyananda tells in his autobiography about when India was trying to get away from you guys. All those, oops, I forgot where I was, right? When India was working for its independence and Gandhi was guiding, when Yogananda was a young man, there were two men who wanted to liberate India from the British by violent means. And they wanted Yogananda because he was powerful and historically, previous lives had been a warrior king. They wanted him to help. But he wouldn't help them because it wasn't his karma. But he also encouraged them to do it. Both of them were arrested and executed. And then Swami Kriyananda said, well, why didn't you tell them not to do it? He said it was their karma. They were born to sacrifice themselves for a cause they believed in. So you see, what is actually going on? That's why this all helps if you can get back, get out to here. Good question. Is there another one? Okay, the point is, this woman has grown up both in South Africa with a lot of racial attitudes and also in fundamentalist religious attitudes, and now you don't feel that way anymore, but your family's still really fixed on it, so do you tell them what you really think? And as you can see that it's a great conflict. Okay, let's think about it from this point of view. What would be helpful? The multiple questions here. Is it important to you, to your well-being, that you speak out loud what you believe to be true? Is your silence hurting you? That's the first question. And if your silence is really hurting you on some deep level, then you have to ask yourself, how much are you willing to sacrifice to be able to stand in my reality? That you can also, none of these have dogmatic answers. This is entirely personal. Is there any possibility that your expressing your point of view would help your family in any way? Would it do them any good at all for you to speak? Is there anybody in the whole crowd who's at all receptive, or are you just going to harden them in their attitudes? When you tell people things they don't want to know, often they just get stronger in what they feel, because now you've challenged them and they get to justify themselves to you. So merely to tell someone the truth when they're not ready for it is often extremely detrimental, because now they just get to be more firm. And so you have to wait for the right time. So those are the two fundamental questions. What is this doing to you? What would this do to them? Is there anybody else being hurt, that you could, that you need to speak up to defend them? And then the other thing you have to realize is that what you say seems so important to us, but what we say is not who we are. It's how we vibrate. And so all of your people, and sometimes also racial, well, a lot of these things are complicated. I'll use religious fundamentalism. I was on a radio program many, many years ago. I'd been invited there to talk about our community, about our organic gardening, about our goat dairy, stuff like that. Somehow or another, before the thing started, the man who was interviewing me discovered that I followed an Indian guru, and he was Jesus Christ, our only Savior, which I'm all for it. I mean, Jesus Christ is a great Savior. Let's stick with him. But he's not the only Savior. But part of his spiritual path was that he had to try to persuade anyone who wasn't one with Jesus that they should be, especially one who follows a heathen guru like this. And he tells me, he told me his own story, that he'd been a homeless person and a drug addict, and Jesus saved his life, which Jesus did save his life. But then we get on to live radio, and he starts witnessing to Jesus Christ and starts trying to persuade me that I have to become a Christian like he is. The last thing in the world I want to do is take away this guy's faith. I mean, he was gripping it with both hands, and there was no room in his consciousness for any other idea except this one. And it would have been a sin for me to even reason with him that he wasn't correct. So I just had to be silent. So that's fun. People who are rigid are sometimes like the alternative is worse. Even though it's not admirable in itself, where are they in the wheel? You know, they have to have this kind of force, or else they fall into some kind of chaos that is infinitely worse. So you do no good. It's not merely that you're not helpful. So with him, I mean, we went on. We talked around it. I kept trying to avoid it. I finally said something like, you know, my way of understanding things allows for both of us. I see that yours doesn't. I'm not going to talk about this anymore. Let's talk about the garden and the goats. And then I just refused to talk. So, you know, we're on live radio. This was a live radio. And I just sat there until he stopped because I couldn't do it to him. Because I didn't need it. You see, I'm quite comfortable saying what I believe. But if I had needed to speak up, that would have been different. But I didn't need to. So I could just do what he needed. So you have to think about it. But the other thing, this is the last thing I want to say, just your being there and just loving these people, not for what they presently think, but for who they are in divinity. And you just quietly love them. Who cares what they're saying? Now, if it's really awful, you'll have to walk out of the room. I can understand that. But you just have to weigh it out. There's no way to say, do this, don't do that. Where am I standing? Which way takes me deeper into my center? Which draws me closer to the divine? I was going to make a picture like this. Our consciousness is like this. It's an inverted triangle. This is where we live, in our very, very contracted ego identity with this one body. But our consciousness, we have this artificial lid on it. But actually our consciousness goes out like that to infinity. So your people are really gripping being white and Christian or whatever it is that they call themselves, but they're just looking for happiness and trying to avoid suffering. And the karma will sort itself out, and if you just quietly love them, poor mama, poor papa, you know, what limitation in you forces you to have somebody be lower than you? It's just not worth it sometimes. Okay, is that fair enough? Hard question, but just the right question, you see, because this is what we're going to be facing. Just, you know, when to speak, when to be quiet, when to act. In terms of social action and so on, I can imagine a moral imperative that may force me to participate more. I think of it, again, the Jewish heritage, but there was a point at which people organized to take the babies out of the Warsaw Ghetto before they burned the ghetto to the ground. So in my mind, I have this imaginary moment when something where the moral imperative is so strong that I have to behave in ways that I've never behaved before. But I've been practicing. I've been practicing all the time. Oh, one more. Here's one more. Very important. When you're with somebody and you don't know what to say, you can pray. You can ask God, ask Divine Mother, what do you want your little child to hear here? Or you can ask their soul, how can I help you? Silently. In yoga, we look at the spiritual eye. So you can sort of look at someone and you look like you're looking at their eyes, but you can be looking at the light here at the Christ Center. And you can say, what do you want from me? What can I do to help you? And you'll be amazed sometimes what comes to you. It's just like a thought will pop into your head. What could I say to you that would help you right now? And something will happen. I've had multiple times. I had a very difficult conversation I needed to have with someone. I was traveling in a car. I didn't know how I was going to have it. I said, how am I going to make this work? She turns around. She asks me the question. Just out of nowhere, she asked me about the very subject I didn't know how to bring up. Other times, I'm sitting here thinking like, I know I want to tell you this. The idea will just leave my mind and it won't come back for a month. A month later, I'll realize, oh, I was about to say that when their soul said no. So that's entertaining. Also, that gives you something very entertaining to do when you're in a situation like that. Just, how can I help you?